Hey guys, I'm back again. I want to share a video with you. I'm going to call it Dealing with Negative Thoughts. And this is an area I've dealt with since the time I got saved up to the present. I mean, before I was saved, I never dealt with it because, that's how I lived. I guess that's how the world lives. And hate and bitterness or whatever is just a norm. But when we come to Christ, that's when, thoughts need to be dealt with. Because we no longer have our mind, we have the mind of Christ. And I'll get into that later. But I want to delve further into this whole negative thoughts and how we can deal with them. I guess what gave me the idea of it was I had a negative thought this morning. And I was just about to rant about this negative. And then I just realized that, after that the enemy jumps on that. And he can make us feel worse. He can speak just even more negative to where there would even be more distance between us and a person. So, I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to do it. So I dismissed it. And so that's what, gave me the idea for this video, because I know all of us as believers deal with, negative thoughts from a negative situation or whatever it is. So, like I said, negativity is what the world deals with. There can be like an argument between two people, they become bitter. The enemy speaks into their mind about hating each other and, just even more negative about a certain person. And that if we listen to it, we get even deeper and deeper into whether rejection, hate, bitterness, or whatever it is. And, we come out of it just feeling like crap. And, there is no forgiveness, of course, in the world. But as in the body of Christ, this is where it needs to change. Because we no longer are dealing with just our mind. We're dealing with the mind of Christ. And we need to think, as we should with the mind of Christ. So, like I said, many are ruled by Satan. There's unforgiveness, bitterness, hate, and a lack of love with each other. And as believers, we still deal with negative thoughts. And if you're wondering why I'm looking over here, I have my notes here because I believe something like this should be even more organized. I want my thoughts to be more organized to share with you. Like I said, as believers, we still deal with negative thoughts. We still listen to them. We still follow through with them. And I want to share just some examples in my own personal life with you about, what happens and how the enemy can speak so that you can get an idea when you probably already have an idea of it and in your own life. But I recall, one second. Okay, I'm back again. I shared this in another video, but I feel, this would be beneficial for you to hear. Years ago, friends of mine indirectly set up a party for, another friend of mine and myself. We had the same birthday. And in it, they sent like an email. It was their plan to, get us to come to the party. And they said in the email, come to such and such party. And so I read that, and I was like, don't they know it's my party? I mean, don't they know it's my birthday too? Because I've told them. And so, I felt like garbage, and the enemy jumped on that. Of course, the enemy knows our past. He knows what triggers us. He knows what bothers us. So that was what I dealt with. And it starts with a negative thought. Once the enemy sees that, he'll jump on it. So he made me feel worse. And he started speaking. they're not your friends. They don't care about you. You mean nothing to them. And I can come into an agreement with those thoughts. And, a good book with this is Love and War by John and Stacey Eldridge. They speak exactly on that in one of their chapters, with marriage. So, this is to tie in with that. But I can make an agreement with the enemy once I accept those thoughts. And once I do, he then has the license to keep speaking the negative. So he started making me feel even worse. And if I was like 10 feet above ground, I was listening to him and I was like way below ground. I was wallow deep in negative. And in my flesh, I did not want to go. Because, apparently these people didn't care about me. I thought they were my friends. And all this was just lies from the enemy, as you will see. So, I guess I told one of them I wasn't going. So the sister in the church heard my negative thoughts about it. And she got on me about it, rightly so. And she's like, you need to go. And she said, the party's up for you too. And so I felt bad because as soon as I got there, on the cake, it had both our names. And I looked, and my other friend was there, the one that shared the same birthday. And it made me feel like garbage because she received that email too, and she willingly came. And I was like, man, if I had the mind of Christ, I would have said, why not go and celebrate their birthday? And I didn't do that. I was wallowing in self-pity. I listened to the enemy. So that's one example. Another example, like personal situations, it could be family-centered or whatever it was. But I had dealt with it for years. Negative things happened around me. Things were said. And since things were said, it made me feel even worse. I listened to the enemy each time. And all it did was continue to bring even more distance between me and another person or persons. And both my wife and I dealt with that, where we listened to the enemy and things got worse, between us. So, the enemy can really work if we allow it, if we allow ourselves to make an agreement with what he is saying by his negative. So, that's another example. Another example is when my friend received a phone call, and I was there with him, and I guess the people on the phone didn't know, but I didn't know that at the time. I thought they knew I was there. So they invited him to come over, and here I'm with my friend, and all of a sudden I started feeling rejection, like, he's better than I am, they want him more than me. Once I had that first negative thought, the enemy saw it, and he jumped on it. Because whether or not I don't know if the enemy sees our thoughts, I'm not sure. I don't really know, but maybe we give off an aura around us of jealousy or whatever it is, and once the enemy spots it, he knows exactly what it is, and then he jumps on us. So I had my first negative thought from that, like they like him better than they like me, and so the enemy jumped on it and kept speaking even more negative and brought division between me and that group. And so, I was speaking out the negative. He's like, I guess he asked me, why don't you come too? And I was like, no, they just want you. And he was like, come on, man. And so, if I had the mind of Christ, I could have averted that negative thinking, if I can only think the good. But it's hard when we're wallowing deep in that negative to think something positive. And it's definitely those with depression, when you allow the enemy, you can seek sink deeper and deeper into depression to where you don't see any light above you. You know, you don't see any light, you don't see any positive outcomes. And that's only because people are making agreement with the enemy. Once they have a negative thought, they grab hold of it, and the enemy works, and then they become even more depressed. So, you know, as we know, the enemy knows our past and what bothers us. You know, even if the enemy sees an aura, he knows our past. So you know it was what we can be potentially rejecting or whatever it is. And he can work on that. So, the next section is entitled But. Like I said, we have the mind of Christ. We can dismiss negative thoughts, you know, that we're dealing with rejection or hurts from the past. All it takes is for us to, once we have that negative thought that comes into mind, we can just push it aside. You say, I'm not even going to think that. You know, that's one way to deal with it. We can tell the enemy to leave, just like Jesus did, you know, when he was being tempted by the enemy in the desert. You know, he was tempting Jesus with the things that a king would desire, you know, having, you know, a kingdom on earth. So Jesus didn't have to go through the death that he did, but he had to go through it to save us. So at the last temptation, you know, the enemy said, I can give all of this to you if you will bow down and worship me. And Jesus said, away from you, Satan, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And so the enemy couldn't make an agreement with anything from Jesus' past. And of course, Jesus could have easily wallowed in rejection because he was rejected his entire life. He was the man of sorrows, according to Isaiah 53. You know, his brothers rejected him. Who knows what was said about him, you know, growing up. You know, they knew his past. They knew, you know, I guess Joseph was his stepdad, so they probably thought that his mom was, you know, with Joseph, they had a kid outside of wedlock, and so that was the negative of that. Or, you know, Mary had a kid from another man, so, you know, all these rumors went around, and just people calling Jesus names, most likely. And so Jesus had to deal with that, and probably a rejection in his own community. So, you know, he could have easily walked in rejection, but you know what? He didn't do it because he was fully committed to the Father. He got rid of any negative thoughts. He got rid of any temptation. So the enemy left him once he couldn't do any more tempting. So we can do it like that. Command the enemy to leave, just like it says in James. Submit to the Lord, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. The next option is we can think the good. You know, it depends on our perception, and sometimes it's not always accurate. You know, I said that in another video that, you know, we may have had a past of rejection or whatever, and we can see through the lens of rejection if we allow ourselves to. And so you may perceive that people are rejecting you, but it may not be that way at all. You know, it could be just your rejection speaking. So, you know, you just got to submit to the Lord, you know, when you're feeling that. Give him what you're feeling and allow him to speak to you. Allow him to speak to your heart so that he can guide you. And the last section is called transplant. You maybe wonder, what is that? I'm not in a hospital. But we don't have to be doctors for this. We can transplant a thought. We can take a negative thought out and put a positive one in its place. For example, you know, if that pain in my past could have been averted, you know, with the whole birthday party. If I would have stopped the enemy at the first negative thought. If I read that, hey, come to such and such party, instead of me thinking, well, they like them better than me, I could have said, you know what? God bless them. I want to go to that party and bless them. If I would have thought that, then the enemy would have left at that time. So, it takes, changing the thoughts with a transplant. Let me go back to another one, personal situations. It's so very easy to walk in the negative because, maybe that's all we ever see. So it takes getting rid of negative thoughts. We have a rejecting circumstance or a negative circumstance we're dealing with. Once we approach it, we can, remove those thoughts and replace them with a positive one. So whenever you come up with a negative situation, could be driving or whatever, and it's your natural tendency you want to, cuss somebody out because they're not driving right, or if you're dealing with somebody that's negative at a store or whatever, you can, the enemy can bring up a negative thought and you can automatically transplant and say, what can I do to bless them? What can I say to them that would bless them? It reminds me of a time that I was at church, and this guy always said negative to us. And I said this, I think, in another video. But he would always say, negative garbage to my friend and I. And one last time, we were throwing the ball around outside of church. And he's like, guys, it's a beautiful day. The sun is shining. The birds are singing. Why not go to the park? And our negative thought came in. It's like, why can't we do it here? And so naturally, the enemy would jump on that and get us to trash. So instead of thinking that, we could have assessed ourselves. See, what can I do to bless this person? And so eventually the enemy worked on, not the enemy, but the Lord worked on me. And I sought him about it. I said, Lord, what do I do? He said, get him a card and write something, to his spirit that would bless him. And so I did. I wrote something that was positive, gave it to him, and his outlook on me changed. His whole disposition and how he treated me. So, it can work if we allow ourselves to listen to the Lord and make that transplant when necessary. And so the last example that I gave about when my friend received a phone call and the others wanted him to come over, I could have thought, well, that's cool, he's getting, blessed. Maybe they want to pray for him or whatever it is. I could have transplanted it with something positive instead of wallowing in rejection. So, maybe there's negative circumstances in your own life that, happen over and over again. But it takes that strength to be able to get rid of that first negative thought that comes into your mind. Whether it's true or untrue, I don't know. But can you replace it with a positive? As soon as something negative comes in, the enemy's going to jump on that if you agree with it. So stop it at its root. As soon as a negative thought comes in, dismiss it. And then just keep walking on. Speak to the Lord about it. You know what? As soon as a negative thought comes in, pray about it. Go to the Lord and say, Lord, this thought's coming in. I pray for this such and such person. I pray blessings upon them and things like that. And if you do that, the enemy will leave. Because he has nothing that he can clutch onto. Like I said, always think the good of somebody. And, it takes, not listening to the enemy. If we're willing to put that extra effort in. Because I know once a negative thought comes in, once we make agreement with it, it's that negative thought that comes in, and there's the bad feelings that come from that thought. So, sorry I was cut off, but, like I said, when we have a negative thought, there's the bad feelings that come from that thought, and it can make us worse, and it can make us feel like we don't want to think any positive. But it's at that moment that we give up our flesh and have the mind of Christ and to think the good. So, I want to end it here, and I thank you for listening. God bless you.